Sports Bazaar with Titus O'Reilly and Mick Molloy.
Well, hello and welcome to the very first episode of Sports Bazaar with Titus O'Reilly, of course, and my good self, Mick Molloy. Titus, pleasure to have you on board. Describe what it is we're hoping to achieve here today.
Well, Mick, you know, we would often, on radio, I'd come in and tell you a weird story from the world of sports, which, you know, there's a limitless supply.
Absolutely.
And we would have about 5 minutes to do these stories.
Yes, that's right.
And then after the show, we'd talk about it, and I'd tell you all the extra stuff, and we'd say, we need more time.
We need more time.
So we decided, let's do this. Let's do a podcast. Let's film it. Let's do all the things.
Without, say, a musical item from Toto, breaking up all the entertainment, which we
Which
love.
some would see as to our detriment. But so we always thought, like, what's the purpose of this show?
Yeah.
And the purpose is these are just crazy stories from the world of sports, and we don't care when they happened, where they happen. We don't care if it's badminton or American football, Australian rules football, rugby. It doesn't matter to us.
Okay, now all I'm thinking about is what's the most bizarre story that could come out of badminton?
Well, we might do that next week. So, you know, there's a few.
Well, someone told me that coming around for badminton was a euphemism for swinging once.
Oh, really?
Have you heard that?
Well, I didn't want to out myself like this so early in.
What say you come around Tuesday evening for some badminton was... Let's go.
How disappointed would you be, though?
Let's Jada Pinkett it kind of stuff.
How disappointed would you be if you then rocked up and it was actual badminton?
Hey, guys, what are we doing? Why are you in a robe? Where's your racket? You get the idea.
So this is sort of our quest to find the weirdest story we can from the world of sports. And, you know, I think we might be at it for a while because there's a lot. And
examined in detail, in forensic detail, which is your strong suit, I have to say.
Well, this is what we want. We want to go down every rabbit hole you can imagine here because it is the detail is the funniest bits of some of these stories.
So that's our mission statement. What have you got to kick it off? This is going to be our premiere episode. So paint the picture for us. Where are we going today?
Well, this one is about a key bit of sport, which is the world of trades. You know, we all know how big trades are in sport.
Trades, drafts, the whole movement between teams. It's
swapping around, all that sort of stuff. And I think probably the biggest moment in this area you would remember was LeBron James announcing he was moving from Cleveland to the Miami Heat.
That was quite an incident, wasn't it?
He did it.
There's a bit of hate mail involved.
There's a little bit of. He was most, and he's since moved, you know, a few times. But he did an hour-long program on ESPN called The Decision. Do you remember this?
I do remember.
And it was just to announce, I'm leaving and where I'm going to go. So you'd think to tell someone where you're going to go, you don't need an hour.
Hey, you don't need 5 ad breaks to do that.
That's right. He stretched it out.
Yeah.
It took to half an hour into the show for him to say where he was going.
It should have been a cliffhanger ending. We come back next week and find out.
And so by the time he announced it, no one cared. So that's the strangest ever you would have thought trade announcement ever. You can't get any weirder than that. But that's what brings us to today's story. Today's story, we're going back to March 1973.
Give us a sport.
The sport is baseball.
Okay, here we go.
So the thing with our podcast is it doesn't matter whether you like this sport or not. It's what goes on around it. So you don't need to know anything about it. You don't need to care. Just this is what it is. So we're going back to March 1973, and we're just before the season's going to start. It's spring training for the New York Yankees. So the most hated, storied,
famous.
Won. You know, they've won. I think it's 27.
Is that the most
Series.
famous baseball cap?
It's the most famous baseball team
and jersey.
Yeah, everything to do with them. So this team, a lot of focus on them. And on March 4th, it was announced that Mike Kekich and Fritz Peterson, great names.
Not household names for me, but far away.
Yeah, Fritz has really declined. You don't run into a Fritz a lot these days, but
maybe for a firstborn, but you know, the good ones are always taken.
So it was announced that they're going to be holding separate press conferences that day, and people were saying, "What's it about?" And it's a trade announcement.
Yeah.
So you're like, "Well, fair enough. It's pretty run of the mill sports stuff."
Yeah. No alarm bells ringing at this stage.
At this stage, Mike Kekich. His is held at 10 a.m. and they announced Fritz Peterson's going to be at 4 p.m. So 2 separate ones.
Okay.
And everyone files in, the media come in, and baseball players move around all the time. Like compared to other sports, it's constant. So they all come in the media to find out what it is. Mike Kekich is going first, and so therefore he has to explain to the media what the trade is. So they're all waiting to hear where he's going. He's going to Cleveland. Is he going to LA? What is it? And he came in and announced that it actually wasn't a trade per se with another team.
Right.
That Mike and Fritz were trading not just their wives, but their families, including the dogs.
Okay, I'm going to have to stop you here. What are you talking about?
So this is
paint the picture for me.
So
that's a lot to drop in one moment.
This is the thing, like people. If you wrote this as a movie, people wouldn't believe it. Two well-known New York Yankees pitchers got up in a press conference and said, "We're here to announce that we've swapped our wives." And everyone in the media room, and how this isn't something they don't teach at schools every day.
Okay, can I ask, was this news to the wives? Oh, are they in the picture at this stage? What is going on?
I think even in the 70s, you still needed to get consent of wives,
that's right,
to swap.
Run it by them.
Yeah, you had to at least run it by them.
Yeah.
So the wives were in on it too, which is, we'll get into that because that opens up, you think about it, we'll get to that.
I've got so many questions. So many questions.
So let me tell you a bit about, let's start with Fritz Peterson.
That's a good place to
let's
start.
try and understand the man a little bit. Now, Fritz was an all-star, fantastic player. Like, he was a real star. He'd won 20 games in 1970. If you win 20 games, you're one of the top pitchers in the league. Yeah. He'd won 109 games while he'd been at New York, and he had an earned run average of 2.52, which is amazing. Yeah, very amazing for a stone pitcher. It was the lowest in the entire history of the old Yankee Stadium. So this guy is a bona fide star.
Yeah, superstar.
Mike Kekich, he's a bit more of a journeyman. He sort of, he was a 10-13 win-loss record the year before. He'd been around, but he wasn't the start. Fritz Peterson, to give you an insight into a man who would swap his wife with another man on the team, which, we've all thought about. He arrived in 1966. So this is 1973, this press conference happens. He's been there for a while since 1966. He immediately became known when he arrived at the club as the clubhouse prankster.
Okay.
Now, I just want to preface this.
Yes.
The wife swapping wasn't
it's not a prank.
Unless, and this is back in 1973, unless they're going to reveal in a few years this is the most elaborate prank he's ever pulled. Yeah, gotcha.
A beauty.
So the first one he did is he put talcum powder in teammate Joe Pepitone's hairdryer. So he's doing things like that. It's like the classics.
How did Joe Pepitone take it? I'm interested to know. Did he see the funny side?
These are grown adults.
That's the second best talcum powder trick I've ever seen.
What's the best?
Well, I live with a guy called Russell Gilbert,
yes,
who's a prankster. And I was on a date, and it was an important one. We were living together, and I said, mate, can you
all dates are important.
Well, this was a beautiful girl. I was actually considering settling down. But I said, mate, can you just give us some time and get out of the house, but leave us alone? Anyway, I'm there talking with this girl, and I see him walking up the hallway in his underpants. And I go, okay, here's trouble. He comes in, introduces himself to Corinne. Hi, Corinne. Then he comes over to the fridge, bends down, opens the door. His ass is sticking out, and at the apex of his bottom sticking out, you hear a fart and a plume of talcum powder. It comes straight out.
It's an elaborate setup.
And showers all over the coffee table. And I went, well, thanks for that. Anyway, I do digress. Go on. Joey Pepitone.
So there's that to Joey Pepitone. Now, this is a step up in his prankster career. He would also print fake newspapers to hand out to all the Yankees. Like the families would come along to the games, and he'd print out newspapers, and they would say on the front cover that the Yankees plane had crashed, and he was the only survivor. Just good honest fun,
Joey Pepitone got off lightly, I reckon.
Very lightly. Can you imagine? No wonder the players' wives loved him when he's doing things like that. He's my favourite prank of his, though, is one of his teammates.
Test results back. Joey Pepitone has 7 days to live. Yeah. That kind of stuff.
So he had one of his teammates was the future Yankees captain, one of their greats, Thurman Munson. He had ordered a holster for his .357 Magnum. So naturally you go, let's play a prank on the guy who we know carries a loaded Magnum with him everywhere he goes. Now, he was right-handed, so he ordered a right-handed holster. Peterson rang up the supplier and got it changed to a left-handed one.
He's a genius. He is an evil genius. By the way, Thurman's not a common first name. What's that
I'd
from?
like to bring it back, I think, because...
I think of the character from Gilligan's Island. No, that was Thurston. Thurston Howell.
So anyway, when he got the wrong holster, Munster goes nuts, sends it back to the supplier going, what the hell? Fritz then rings up the supplier a second time, and this tells you something about the supplier, and organises them to instead send a booklet on how to draw a gun left-handed.
Mate, so this guy's, he is ahead
He's on another level. Yeah. He's just operating on another level. Anyway, well, Kekich arrived 3 years after Fritz had been at the Yankees. In 1969, he rocks up. He'd been at the Los Angeles Dodgers, and he'd originally been seen as going to be the next big thing. So Sandy Koufax had been the great Dodgers pitcher. He was the guy they saw to replace him once he retired. They were so excited. This is in the 60s. They gave him a $50,000 signing bonus.
What's that by today's standards?
Oh,
give me something.
A few million at least. That's huge, massive for the day, right? So he got that. Now his problem was he could throw the ball insanely fast, but he couldn't direct it at all. Oh my God! It just went anywhere.
It's kind of important.
It's kind of important in baseball.
It's one of the Twin Towers. I would have thought insanely fast and accurate.
Yeah, they're the two things you want to tick off. Now he finally. Actually gets traded. The Dodgers give up on him and go, he's never going to make it. Yankees take him as a bit of a, just filling a gap on the roster thing. He arrives and becomes roommates with a guy by the name of Fritz Peterson. Now, I don't think he realised at this point that this was a turning point in his life.
Okay. Things were going to change dramatically.
Yeah. Now, the Yankees at the time, and we know them now.
That's an important scene in the movie of this story, I reckon.
This story, Ben Affleck.
Fritz, is it? Yes.
Wow. Ben Affleck and Matt Damon want to turn this story into a movie. They've been in talks to do it. So, it's that sort of story. Now, in 1964, this is the team that these guys arrive at. The Yankees had been purchased by CBS, which is the TV and radio network, right? They bought 80% of the team, and they turn out to be like the worst owners of a sports team you can almost have. Well, they basically just don't know how to run a team, so they instantly have that problem. And then, so on the field, it turns terribly. So firstly, they've had the most dominant team in the century. Like this is Babe Ruth, Joe DiMaggio, Mickey Mantle, they win a World Series more than the sun comes up. It's the one thing you can judge in life is going to happen. Suddenly, under CBS, they finish for the first time ever with the first losing season in 40 years.
Okay.
They then, the next season they have is even worse. They finished dead last in the American League, which hadn't happened until 1912. So it's not going well, right?
Fans not happy?
Fans are unhappy. The Yankee Stadium, which is like this crown jewel of the Yankees,
absolutely.
The house that Babe Ruth
sacred site.
It's completely in disrepair. So people don't want to even go to the stadium because the stadium's literally falling down around them, which is not something people look for. They're trying to renovate. CBS say, well, let's renovate the stadium, but to do that, we need to move out for a couple of years. So they go to the New York Mets and say, can we play at Shea Stadium? And the Mets say, no. We hate you.
True New York style.
True New York style. They go, no, we hate you. They literally, we would prefer you just didn't exist.
Fantastic.
So they don't give it to it. So they're stuck in this terrible ownership, terrible stadium, and then you got Fritz running around
with a bit of spare time on his hands.
Yeah,
is that what you're saying?
Prodding people who have loaded magnums. This is where it's going. So they're all in this thing. So they're absolutely on the wane. But despite all this, and despite the Yankees really declining and it not being a fun time on the field, Fritz and Kekich, they become good friends.
Okay.
They become close. And soon they find out that actually their wives, Marilyn Peterson, who's Fritz's wife, and Susan Kekich, who's Mike's wife, also get along really well too.
Quite well.
It turns out they really, really, really get along well.
God.
Like not a little bit, they really get along.
This is going to get juicy here, isn't it? We should open a window or something.
This is the big. I want to turn your mind to this in a second.
Okay.
So, on July 15, 1972, this is the year before the press conference, in the middle of that year. baseball writer Maury Allen invites Peterson and Marilyn for a barbecue. And, this is when journalists and sports people sort of talked a bit more.
Okay.
And it wasn't those, they were sort of friends. And he wanted to catch up, have a party, chat, and talk a bit about the Yankees, how they're going, all that. Peterson said, do you mind if we bring Mike Kekich and his wife Susan as well? Okay. That'd be great.
Yeah.
We're very fond of them.
What? Jesus. Okay.
And Alan says, the more the merrier.
Okay.
At the time, not realising how apt.
The ramifications of that statement.
So the barbecue's pretty standard. They all have a nice time. A bunch of other people there. Except Alan noticed that Marilyn Peterson, and he says this years later, but looking back on it, he did notice at the time that Marilyn Peterson wasn't wearing her usual blonde wig, which she usually wore because Fritz liked it.
Okay.
So he's dating a woman who insists has different hair colour, which is surely a red flag. Making your partner wear a wig.
Can you pop this on? And I'm going to call you by a different name as well.
Yeah, could I call you by my teammate's name, wife's name? Is that all right? So I think that's a bit of a red flag.
Yeah, she should have. Something's not right.
So after the barbecue, Alan sees them off, walks them to the end of the driveway. They decide, the two couples, that they want to keep the night going. So they're in different cars, and Peterson said, when we were deciding to leave, we had driven two different cars and happened to park behind each other out in the street. I said to my wife, Marilyn, why don't you ride with Mike to the diner in Fort Lee, and I'll take Susan with me, and we'll meet there and we'll go from there.
And that's how the story ends. Starts. This is it. This is the pivotal moment in movies. The inciting incident.
They're starting to do it. He says, we did that. So we had so much fun, Susan and I, Mike and Marilyn, that we decided, hey, this is fun. Let's do it again. So they did it the next night.
Do what again? Like travel in convoy with alternate partners.
That I find weird too. Like if someone said to me, I'll take your wife, you take mine. I'm like, why?
Yeah, I would have thought that's...
Wouldn't that be the normal reaction?
That's someone tipping their hand off, really. Okay, all right. So we're...
Although I guess some couples are like, I'd be happy for my wife to be in a different car. So,
sometimes I like to sit in the back seat while my girlfriend drives.
That's not weird at all. So they decide to do it the next night. They go out and they went out to this bar in New Jersey, and Mike and Marilyn leave early.
They
not together. They go,
but are they a couple? They're the couple.
No, they're not together.
Oh my God!
So this is
it's on.
Yeah, Fritz's wife leaves and Mike Kekich leaves, leaving Fritz and Suzanne. And he says, we stayed and had a few drinks and we ate.
But you need to fill it in for me. Under what guise? We're just going to...
We're just having a great time. They were tired. They wanted to go home. All right, well, we'll stay and keep going.
Is it game on here?
He doesn't say it's game on here. He says we just ate and drank that night. So you kind of look at that. Now, this is the bit, and they're both very vague on this, which might be for good reason. They say... This sort of happened a bit off and on, and then it didn't take long for the two couples to realise they said that they wanted to see more of the other's spouse.
Okay.
Now, Peterson says, it just happened, it wasn't planned. Now, to me, I want to know, you've got to have, so there's 4 people involved here. Yeah. You have to have some real confidence to be the first mover. To be the first mover in this area.
Guys, I've got an idea.
I'm just throwing this out here. You can say no. You can say no.
Ding, 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 ding. Bit of silence, bit of show. Wow.
So at some point in this part, they sort of someone says, well, what about it? And amazingly, no one says, no, thank you.
Because that has to be unanimous. Doesn't it? I would have thought that needs a show of hands. All 4 need to go up in the air.
It's 3-1. It's 3-1.
You're cooked.
You're in.
This is
bad luck.
Disaster.
Bad luck, Marilyn. It's 3-1.
Marilyn, you've been outvoted.
We live in a democracy, Marilyn.
You're going home with Fritz.
So they say it wasn't planned. Peterson says all of us felt the same way. We went on from there, and eventually he fell in love with my wife, and I fell in love with his.
All right. Well, it doesn't seem like there's too much damage.
Well, no. Would it be fair to say, Mick, at this stage you couldn't see anything going wrong?
I couldn't see anything going wrong. They all drive off in separate cars into the sunset and live happily ever after.
Everyone's happy. There's no issues whatsoever. So anyway, Peterson says Mike started campaigning for his wife. He said, but he started talking about it seriously. he went and told his wife, Susan, that he loved Marilyn more. She seemed okay with it, is what he says. So they started very quietly, just basically dating the other person's wife.
Yeah. Did you think of the guys, just before we go, I'm sorry to harp on about this, but do you think this came from the girls' camp or the guys' camp? Or we don't know. They're deliberately vague.
They're deliberately vague on it. I've read everything you could possibly read on these guys. And
okay, that's a bit of a worry too.
Just trying to find I've been trying to find the secret source of how to do this. There's no real.
Okay.
You'd be surprised how little info there is. Like, I feel like contacting Fritz and going, but how?
What's the secret? How'd you drop the boom on this one?
I think they've been hanging out, and it had just started actually to shift. That from what I can tell from reading all the different things, they had started to enjoy the other partners' couples more.
Who's making the movie?
Well, they're trying to get it made. Ben Affleck and
I'm telling
Matt Damon.
you, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. At some point, someone's got to say something.
Yeah. Well, do you know the best thing about
who would be who? Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. What would be the best?
I think Ben Affleck would be Fritz. I think that I think he's on brand with that one.
He's on brand.
Well, the thing is, they're trying to get it made, and one of the reasons they love this story so much, those guys, is they're big Boston Red Sox fans who are the arch enemies of the Yankees. So they want to make a movie basically to embarrass the Yankees, which
This is incredible.
Like,
this is like, who is that woman making pictures for Hitler?
It's just total propaganda.
Hey, but just quickly, so in the movie, the scene will have to have a moment like where they throw their keys in a bowl, or someone's hand touches someone else's hand, someone walks into the wrong room.
But you know what I think would be the
car
best?
with the other couple in it starts bouncing up and down with the car behind it going, well, that's interesting. There has to be a moment.
Yeah, there has to be some, the little glances that lead to something. I also would love to see a scene where, let's say it's Fritz says, guys, I've just been thinking, would you be interested in swapping? And someone else says, oh, I'm glad someone else has raised it.
Finally. And they all heave a sigh of relief.
And there it is.
They never all slept together, did they?
Well, I don't think so.
Where's this going?
I'll get to why I don't think that happened, but I don't think so.
Right, sorry, I rudely interrupted, but there's a lot of questions going on.
Well, anyone listening to this is going to be saying, well, how do you do this? Because if you thought about you and your partner and your best friends who are a couple,
I just like to do it with a partner. I'm spending a lot of time going solo these days. The idea of a partner is kind of attractive. Where were we in the story?
So at this point where they all basically start dating the other man's wife, which is a phrase I never thought I'd say. Okay. They sort of say, right, we're doing this, and then they say they haven't decided to swap fully, but they're just basically dating the other man's wife. And I'm assuming in that not seeing their own much in that regard.
And it's all consensual.
It's all consensual.
Otherwise it'll be a bit quiet in the dugout.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you need at least a 50% buy-in to get this scheme off.
All right, yep.
Yeah.
Go.
I'd love to know if someone was dragging, it was a peer pressure thing. Yeah. Go on. Come on, Susan.
Just give it a go.
What?
You'll never know if you just give it what. Just if you don't like it, we'll go back to...
Now, this is the thing. They do a deal. And the deal is, if anyone isn't happy, we call it all off immediately.
Okay, that'd be good sense for any relationship.
Yeah, that's right. That's so they all say this. So despite all this, though, the season ends in September and they've been dating their teammate's wife for a few months. Yeah. They go back to their respective... They don't live in New York, so... Peterson goes back to Illinois with Marilyn. Kekich stays with his wife, Susan. And Peterson, though, in this moment, they're sort of separate. He has this very scary plane ride from New York to Boston where the plane almost goes down. Okay. And he says, I realised I didn't even care if the plane went down. I just want to be with Susan more than if the plane crashed.
Wow.
So he gets off the plane, walks straight up to a phone, rings Kekich and confessed he wanted to do more than just date his wife. Look, I know I've asked a lot, but I want to do more than just date your wife.
Wow. Okay.
So this is the phone call he gets saying, I want to do more. So they then chat and he says, I don't know how you feel about Marilyn, but if you're interested, meet me halfway. So they say, right, all right, instead of dating, let's make the switch. this is when they decide to make the switch.
So this is not public at the moment?
This is
that
not
what you're
public.
saying? But what is he asking for, like a full swap?
Full swap. I'm not just
And go
dating your
public?
wife. Well, they realise they have to go public in a bit, but first they just decide we're going to make the switch. And so they decided they're going to make the switch. But there was a time in this before the press conference that the whole arrangement was called off briefly because some weren't happy. But then they went, nah, we're fine. We'll go back to swapping.
Some weren't happy.
Some weren't happy. We'll get to who wasn't soon.
Okay.
But they do. So the final move
Was there an
made
incident or just natural wear and tear?
just wear and
Someone just woke up and went, what are we doing?
realised one of them woke up.
Okay.
just
All right.
woke up to the whole situation.
Continue.
So then the final move's made December 14th, 1972. They literally move. And Peterson said, I didn't think I was putting the kids outside the door and saying goodbye, but that's what he's going to do. And he
Okay, I'm going to
realises...
stop you there. This is the first I've heard of children. What are you talking about?
Well, I said at the start they're swapping families and the dog.
Who has children?
They both have children. They both have a couple of kids each. And they decide...
Hey kids, family meeting. Family meeting.
They decide that it's best if the kids go with the mother and the dogs.
It's more complicated than you'd think, isn't it? You see, well, in my mind, it's a straight swap. But
I've
now,
always thought wife swapping was a simple thing.
What about
It's counterintuitive, isn't it? That it's
male
hard.
kids go with the dads, female kids go with the mums.
I would like to see a lottery system. Or a trade, like you pick the kid
like
you
a
want.
trade.
I don't really care for her, but you can have him.
You can take him, but you got to take her as well.
They're a
Got to
package
take Gwen
deal.
if you're taking.
They literally
Herman.
even swapped the dogs. The dogs
who
were
the
probably
dog
the
goes
hardest
with?
hit. Well, the dogs went with the wives. So basically, the blokes just swap. They completely
So
swap.
the blokes swapped. Otherwise, all as is.
Yeah, that's it. So the rest is all as is. So the kids stay.
away.
So they're giving up their kids basically. So which.
This is a crazy story. Just saying.
So they do it, and they decide that they're going to do this. So they're moving the children and everything, and they start to. They say that they are not heartless. They start to condition the kids for change. Fritz says, in particular, he went out of his way to build Mike up to his sons. You're going to go live with this great guy. He said, I tried to make out to them that he was a super idol. I said he was stronger, faster than me. Kids are impressed with things like that. And I'm like, I don't think Fritz is really...
Oh, wow.
I don't think kids go, oh, it's great, Dad's left, but we've got a much better dad. I mean, that does happen, but...
That's incredible. Okay, so he's talking him up, fluffing the pillows of the new dad.
The new dad saying, these guys are great. You're going to love this
positive,
new
I
dad.
suppose. It's better than most. It usually goes the other way.
So they did all that. So in Christmas of 72, the two boys fly out to California to be with Mike, and then Fritz gets the two girls fly out with Susan to join him in Jersey, and that's the swap. It's
And there
all
you
done.
go. It's done.
So then it starts to move into 1973. It starts to move, and all this talk starts to come in. That the rumours start to go around that this is sort of going on.
Well,
People start to hear
I'm
about
going to stop
it.
you there. Do the teammates know? Are they in the picture?
This is where they're starting to find out. So after the
Okay.
swap's made, I think people start to like, you're right, Fritz. You're not. The talcum powder incidents have decreased significantly.
That's right. You seem
You've
to be
got something on your
distracted.
mind.
What are you working on? Something big? Oh, yeah.
So the players start hearing about it and like going, "What's going on?" So one guy, the Yankees outfielder, Ron Sabota, he had attended the barbecue, the famous barbecue where this all started.
yeah.
And he hears about it and he says, my first reaction, I had a solid marriage, so I was like, okay, that wouldn't likely happen to me. And he said it probably wouldn't happen to a lot of people. But remember, this was the 70s, not that far from the 60s. So that was his reaction.
All right. Okay. So he's going fair enough.
I don't even know in the 70s there was a massive trend in wife swapping.
It still feels a little unusual. All right. So let's go on. So the teammates are now...
So they're heading into the night. So the Yankees are heading into the 1973 season. The Fritz and Kekich have not announced to anyone that this swap has happened, but it's starting to get
Rumours
out.
are swirling.
At this point, CBS decide to sell the team. So CBS decide we've had enough losing money and losing on the field.
Yeah.
We need to find a sucker to offload this to.
Sure.
And they look around and they land on a guy who agrees to buy it, a guy by the name of George Michael Steinbrenner III.
Wow.
So George Steinbrenner is a legendary name for the Yankees.
Absolutely.
And people will know him through a lot of pop culture references, which we'll get to. So he decides to buy the team, and his kids still own the team.
Well,
He's
when he
passed
buys it,
away
what was
now.
his background?
So Steinbrenner's come from money, right? He comes from Ohio. His father's built up this huge shipping company that hauls ore and grain on the Great Lakes in America, and he joined the family firm. And he as a young man, began to revitalise it. So he started putting together, lots of money. He purchased the American Shipbuilding Company. It had sales of $100 million a year. So he'd become rich. And he decided he wanted to own sports
He's from Ohio?
teams. Ohio.
Was he already a Yankees fan?
No, he wasn't a Yankees fan or anything. He's from Ohio. He has already dipped his toe in the sporting landscape by buying the Cleveland Pipers. Now, the Cleveland Pipers were in the National Industrial Basketball League and then moved to the ABL. He had bought this team. He'd loved owning it. Now, the early warning signs are there of what George Steinbrenner is like.
He's from Ohio. That's a fairly conservative area, I would have thought.
He found that he loved running a team and he loved, as owner, interfering in the day-to-day operations of the running of the team.
Gotcha.
So he wants...
Hands-on.
This is which he famously did at the Yankees. But this is an example of, when I say interfering in the day-to-day, I don't mean I don't look at that logo or we should play that song in the background. He once sold a player at half-time to the team the Pipers were currently playing.
What?
So this player's at half-time
brilliant.
playing for the Pipers.
How's
Half.
How's he nutted that deal?
He just did
the
deals.
guy have to actually swap his outfit during the game?
Yeah, it's like 1 minute he's playing on the other side. I mean, I think they played a bit fast and loose with the trade rules, but not the weirdest trade Steinbrenner will run into.
That guy would have been on the winning and losing team that day.
Yeah, that's right.
It's unusual.
This is what Steinbrenner's like. So he brings this. Now, the ABL, the American Basketball League, it didn't last long and it folds. And Steinbrenner's tries to get the Pipers into the NBA. So this is before the NBA is a huge thing, but it's the dominant one. And he tries to get them. They say, no, we don't want the Pipers. So Steinbrenner is left with $125,000 in debt and personal losses of $2 million. Despite this, and his father says, son, some advice, never get into sports again. Steinbrenner, of course, then says no and purchases the Yankees for $8.7 million. Right? So this is 1972, buys this. Now, CBS had purchased their 80% for $11.2 million. So he's done it on a about in 1964. So he's done a great deal here. Now, to put this in context of how good a deal this is for Steinbrenner, after losing money on the Pipers, in 2020, Forbes estimated the New York Yankees are valued at $5 billion.
Well done.
So he's bought it for 8.7. It's now worth $5 billion.
Years?
Well, that's from the 72 to 2020. So not bad.
How much in crypto coin?
That's one Bitcoin. It's one Bitcoin, depending on when you're listening to this. Now, so Steinbrenner rocks up to this Yankee team that's been terrible. It's got all these issues going on, and he starts interfering as much. In the time that he is manager there, in his first 23 seasons, he changed managers. In 23 seasons, he changed managers 20 times.
Unreal.
Billy Martin was fired and rehired 5 times.
In the middle of a game?
Yes.
And then made him manage the opposition team?
Well, during his first 26 years with the club, he fired 13 public directors. Harvey Green, who worked for him, said, the first time George fires you, it's very traumatic. The 3 or 4 times after that, it's like, great, I've got the rest of the day off. Because he hires people and then...
That's fantastic.
And then just hires them back. So people start to not care if they're fired. Seinfeld had Steinbrenner on... Seinfeld had him written into the script, remember, when George worked for the Yankees and Steinbrenner was his boss.
I did enjoy that impersonation.
And they played off this... this joke of him always firing people, to the point where in that actual episode, he mentions all the people, to George, he mentions all the people he's ever fired. Yes. The joke being that he includes in that joke the manager, Buck Showalter, who has never been fired. So that's the joke. Like, oh, you're going to fire. Within 2 weeks of that episode airing, he did fire. He does fire Buck Short.
How do you reckon he would have? Would he enjoy the impersonation?
Well, this is the best bit. He says he found the portrayal in Seinfeld unflattering, but essentially accurate.
Okay, well,
That's pretty bad when you go, it's a terrible, it's unflattering, but it's spot on. So here's it like this. And so he shows up in early 1973, spring training hasn't been announced. Some of the players are starting to know about Kekich and Fritz, but George Steinbrenner doesn't know. So he's walking into this team going, I'm going to turn it around. Yeah. It's going to be a totally different thing under me.
What could go wrong?
Yeah. And he's thinking, oh, I know how to fix this team. And so he does some good things straight away. He goes and he does a deal with the city of New York City to buy the stadium. So they'll own it and he'll lease it back. And therefore, once they own it, they can renovate it because they also own Shea Stadium that the Mets play in. So the city says to the Mets, you have to let the Yankees play while we fix up this stadium. So
this is a pretty cool move.
Yeah, it goes really. He doesn't have to pay for it. He doesn't have to, and he gets that done. So that's the first thing he does. So he thinks he's coming in hot. Now the first thing he thinks is what the Yankees really need. He brings in, he goes and introduces a personal appearance policy. This is the thing he thinks this team needs, which is the Yankees have to be, it says, if you want to be a Yankees player, you have to be clean shaven and have short hair cut above the collar. So this is the 70s, and he's saying this is what it's got to be. This is what he's worrying about.
Kind of
yeah, no, there's the Simpsons episode Homer at the Bat, you might remember, where Monty Burns fires Don Mattingly for refusing to shave his sideburns. Remember that one?
That's all about.
And he's saying, I don't know what you think sideburns are. And he goes, I said side. And it's like, that keeps happening. The joke in that is, and at the end of that, when Burns tells him to shave him once again, Mattingly walks away and says, I still like him better than Steinbrenner. And that's because Steinbrenner refused to... Mattingly wasn't obeying, and he was like one of their best... He was the star of the 80s for the Yankees. Yes. He refused to obey the policy for some time, and so Steinbrenner removed him from the lineup. and this policy is in place to today. Wow. Like, even now, the Yankees players, if you look at them, they always have hair above the collar, and they don't have beards and all that sort of stuff. It's still there.
So it's the new clean-cut, squeaky clean New York Yankees under Steinbrenner.
So Lou Piniella is there. He's told who's a great player now, manages. He told Steinbrenner at spring training about this hair policy. He said Jesus had long hair, and therefore the players should be allowed to have long hair as well.
That's pretty good argument. Solid.
Steinbrenner points to the nearby swimming pool and says, "If you can walk on water, you can wear your hair." You can wear your hair any way you like.
Jeez, there's a lot to like in this story.
So Steinbrenner's going this. So anyway, while this is happening, while he's running around putting in this thing, Peterson and Kekich stories now circulate to the point where most of the club know that two players have swapped wives, kids, and dogs.
And Steinbrenner doesn't know?
Yeah, he doesn't know. He's about the only person left. Because often the boss, no one wants to tell the boss.
Yeah. Someone's going to get sacked here.
Yeah. So Phil Pepe, who covered the Yankees for the Daily News, said it was hilarious because Steinbrenner's in the dark. And he wrote, it's hard to know whether to laugh or cry. George Steinbrenner bought the team weeks before and mostly walked around pointing at guys whose hair he thought was too long. Ralph Hock, the manager, sat there smoking a cigar trying to keep a straight face. Because he's like, this is the least of your problems.
Yeah. Wow.
You think hair's the problem. You just wait.
This is incredible.
So Steinbrenner's arrived. Everyone pretty much knows. Even some of the media are sort of across it.
Media are onto it. Okay.
Media are starting
to blow. Yeah, the genie's out of the bottom.
The genie's out of the
basically.
bottom. So Peterson and Kekich decide they need to announce this swap in an attempt to control how it's reported, they say. So Peterson approaches Maury Allen, the journalist who owned the barbecue, and says...
the famous barbecue. Keys in the salad bowl.
He says, look, this has happened. I've got an interesting thing I just want to get your thoughts on. Which, the thing about this, and might be a great movie, is I would pay anything to be in the room, when they're telling people. When you say, look, once again, how do you approach this? Do you want some pitching advice? Are you being traded? No, I just... Look, there's no easy way to say this. I've swapped wives with Mike.
Yeah. That's a press statement, isn't it? You don't want to be there for that.
So he goes to Maury Allen and says, look, perhaps you could write something about this. And I'm
He's
hoping,
leaking it.
Yeah, well, no, he goes and gets advice and he says, look, this has happened. I'm thinking you could maybe write something about it. And Peterson said he was thinking at the time that Morey, because he knew him, wouldn't make it sound too dirty. I don't think Morey's a miracle worker.
Got to put a positive spin on this.
Yeah. So
It's going to be like an episode of the Waltons when we're done here.
But at this point, before Morey can even write anything, Steinbrenner finally finds out. Everyone finds out, and it's decided this is an absolute mess. We have to do a proper media press conference. So they do this media conference, which brings us to March 4th. It's a month out from the season.
Company or something. Or did they have them in those days?
I just think
this is probably the invention of them.
I don't even know if, like, the best PR person, some events are not, you can't spin them, Mick.
No.
Like, what are you going to say?
Well, I don't know, but you need a department well versed in the dark arts of releasing public statements to
Well, you know,
paper
in sport,
over
though,
the
you know,
cracks
like every time, like, say an athlete gets caught drink driving,
Sure.
they almost can just dust off the last media release and change the name and the date.
Yeah, we got this.
You know, he's very sorry. He's going to go do a course.
He's in therapy right
now.
now.
No one's more ashamed than him.
Dealing with issues.
This one is not one you'd have to write this from scratch. Like, here are your
You're not going to believe this.
Can you imagine? Hey, where are my talking points on this?
Just stick to the script. Don't say anything. I don't even know. The journalists wouldn't even know what to ask. Like, what kind of press conference? This is just a bombshell.
Yeah, I have a few questions, but so they answer to it. So this brings us back to the start where they're doing the media conference, and Mike Kekich has to go first, and he tried to make the argument to the media that there was nothing unsavoury about the incident, that there's nothing to see here. He says in the media conference.
But hang on, there was the media. There was two separate press conferences.
Yeah, one at 9 in the morning, one at 4 in the afternoon. So separate.
So they never all four appeared.
No. So
Did
Mike
the
has
wives
to front.
appear?
No, Mike just has to front it by himself.
Boy, that's the short
And
straw.
Because by the time they get to Fritz, they kind of know, but they've probably had time to think of questions.
Oh, well,
so I don't know what's better to go. Where would you go, first or second? Hey, I'm not saying this is going to happen to you and I, but what would you pick, first or second?
You'd lead off, I reckon. You'd get it done.
I'd do the second and walk in and just go, well, you sort of know the story, so thanks for coming. You know, nothing to see here. So he says...
You do get the last word, don't you?
You do.
So, well, I said I'm not happy about it, but I suppose there's not a lot I can do about it.
I think it's going to be a trade that will benefit both sides. There's no losers here, guys.
So this is the day we've had...
So Kekich is fronting the media. So as he's fronting the media, he says this to the assembled media, unless people know the full details, it could turn out to be a nasty type thing. Don't say this was wife swapping, because it wasn't. We didn't swap wives, we swapped lives.
Okay. And let the spin commence.
I think you did swap wives.
I think you can dress it up any way you like, but
really,
that bloke's boffing your wife.
The kids and the dogs, they're the knives and forks in the deal, aren't they?
I would have taken the dogs to the press conference just to distract.
They should have led with that. We're just announcing we've swapped dogs.
Oh, yeah.
As part of the deal, our wives will be going with the dogs.
The kids are gone. All right.
So he does that. There's nothing like, LeBron said he was taking his talents to Miami. Kekich didn't say anything about taking his talents to Suzanne or anything like that. Peterson then fronts up in the afternoon, and his main message, and he starts to tell the media how they should cover the story.
In the press conference?
Yeah, and he says, don't make anything sordid out of this.
Okay.
Say anything that way.
Look for the positives.
So Peterson would later say that he didn't think the announcement would be a big story.
And how was it covered? Can I ask you? What was the general tone?
Well, I mean, he says he was disabused of this notion because he woke up the next day and the first thing he saw was his picture on TV. And he went, oh, this is a big one. So this is wall-to-wall coverage.
This is incredible.
And people... and you'd be surprised, but the media didn't take the life-swapping angle. They start going right into it.
I'm still fascinated. I still need to know more about Steinbrenner. We're getting to him. I just want to know, that's a scene in the movie.
Steinbrenner stays so far away from it.
There must have been a moment when they had to go to him.
But it's never been revealed because he just doesn't like, he's like... He's front and center on haircut issues. They're of this view that it wasn't going to be a big deal. It's a huge deal. It's wall-to-wall media. It's everything. Now, the kicker here, having to go through all this, and Mike Kekich having the lead off with the first press conference, is Kekich, it turned out, and came to light quickly in the days after, had already broken up with Susan at the time of the announcement. So he's gone through all this.
Mate, this guy's loose. How do you make such a momentous, seismic change in your life and decision with ramifications that affect everyone including two dogs
and your kids?
Oh yeah, and
as an afterthought,
and then go, don't know. I'm cooling.
So the New York Times Murray Chass, he mentions that he said at the two media conference, it was obvious by this point that they had bitter feelings towards each other. The two men, they're falling out. The two men are by this point actually they're not even speaking to each other.
It has gone south.
Right and proper, like left field.
Is it remorse?
We'll get to remorse. Susan and Kekich, that ended things. Marilyn, Peter,
How many more kickers are there?
There isn't
every
kicker.
time you say he's a kicker, I go, this has to be the final kicker.
You keep jumping ahead, and I'm like, I don't want to tell him it gets worse.
All right, let's go.
So Marilyn and Fritz still going strong at this point. Mm-hmm. Susan and Kekich, they've split up. Kekich said his physical attraction to Marilyn was strong.
Right. Yeah.
But they argued. He put this down. Now, this is him hooking up with Fritz's wife. He says, we were very physically attracted to each other, but we argued. He put this down to the fact that they were, and this is a direct quote for him, we were born under the same sign. We sometimes butt heads. She and I are on a high pitch in our emotion.
Wow.
So they suddenly realise we've dated for about 3 months.
But hang on, that's the biggest problem they've got in their life is their star sign.
This same star. Never date someone under the same star sign is the takeout message I want people to...
Kids,
from this hole...
if you're listening, write this down. This is the only mistake they made. Same star sign.
So Kekich just suddenly realised that, well, the deal was if anyone's unhappy, we reverse the swap. But Fritz isn't interested in reversing the swap. He's like, I'm very happy with your wife.
Is this a cooling off period kind of thing?
He goes back and says, well, we all said if we weren't all happy, we'd swap. And Fritz is like, no.
Wow.
So this is why they're not talking.
Can he take his original wife back? Can he have two wives?
He can't get Marilyn back. Marilyn's happy with Fritz.
Oh, Marilyn's happy with Fritz.
So he's just suddenly broken up with Suzanne. So he says, Marilyn and I thought we were perfectly suited, just like Fritz and Suzanne. Marilyn was all for the swap in the beginning, but then she backed off. All four of us had agreed in the beginning that if anyone wasn't happy, the thing would be called off. But when Marilyn and I decided to call it off, the other couple had already gone off with each other, and they didn't want to change. They were happy.
Can I ask, and I'm frightened to ask, but was this a natural wear and tear, or was there an incident? Was there something?
They just fought. They just didn't get along. Who would think that leaving your husband for another man that you've known for 3 months, like you've dated for 3 months, moving kids, dogs, and announcing it to the New York press could put a strain on a new relationship, Mick.
Classic.
It's just, Fritz in his defence, or him defending himself, said it hadn't worked, and he said that they weren't going back and they weren't agreeing to the deal of reversing it because Susan and him were now free people with free minds.
Wow. Okay.
Which would have to be pretty free.
Free agents.
He says, it would have been perfect if it had worked out for everyone involved, but I don't feel guilty.
Okay.
So getting to remorse. So this has all happened. It's all gone down and they all end up staying. Now, the problem is...
They're no longer on the same team?
It's on the same team.
They're still playing together.
So you'd be surprised that this whole affair led to rumours that they could both be traded away from the team. So Steinbrenner's gone.
Got involved here.
This is not what I really want. So rumours keep getting asked of Kekich, do you know you could be traded? And he says, they say, Mike, do you think you could be traded? And he says, well, I'm here. We're still teammates. I only want to be, in terms of a trade, where Fritz is. It's the only way I can be sure of seeing my kids.
Maybe the kids have to be part of the trade.
So he's basically got himself this situation where he's lost his wife and his kids to this other guy, and he doesn't like him. And now to see them,
so this is going to be a rom-com, really, isn't it?
So then that year, 73, both their like baseballing careers in terms of on the field, with their mind on other things, they have terrible years. You'd be surprised to learn. They don't do well. They're suddenly losing a lot. Fritz wins 8, loses 15. He's terrible. Kekich is so bad. He only made 4 starts and he basically only walks people. He doesn't do anything good. So they're both absolutely terrible. So on April 26, Mike's traded to Cleveland, and they do this big trade.
Pipers?
Back to the Pipers at half time. He's traded away. And then Peterson gets traded a little bit later. So they're all suddenly split up. Well, sort of end of story. Now, bringing us up to the present day. So Fritz Peterson and Susan Kekich, now Susan, they're still married. They're happy. They're together.
How is his kids?
Well, the two players, they haven't spoken at this point in time in about 15 years. Yeah. So they don't speak at all. They don't like each other. They say they paid a tremendous point, but Kekich said, the only way I could justify giving up my daughters was for a love far greater than any I've known. By American standards, Susan and I had a good marriage, but I wanted a great marriage. I was idealistic, I guess, he said. So he says he wanted to work it out, but it hasn't. He now says he's dubious that such a love exists. So at
least he's not going to die wondering.
Yeah. Now, Fritz,
he's a lover.
Fritz says, I could not be happier than with anybody in the world. Mama, as he now calls Suzanne, and I go out and party every night. We're still on the honeymoon, and it's been a real blessing. So he's all fine. He has. Yeah,
that's really rubbing it in.
Yeah. So he actually now writes books. Fritz writes books. So Kekich goes off and tours Japan, and then his life just crumbles.
He never found another.
He just travels around the world
wife to marry. That was the end for him.
That was the end. He's done. Now, Fritz has turned to writing books. Now, his first book was called Mickey Mantle is Going to Heaven, and in his books he shares sort of memories, little chapters on some of his old teammates in baseball. And at the end of each chapter, he decides whether they're, in his mind, because Fritz has found God, whether they're going to go to heaven or hell.
So he says, he's the hanging judge.
He says Mickey Mantle and Bobby Mercer, by virtue of their acceptance of Jesus Christ as their Lords, they're first-round draft picks for heaven.
Okay.
He says others, like Maury Allen, who was the journo and wrote a book on this whole thing, said his book contained 43 incorrect facts or mistakes, and therefore he's going to have a more prolonged swim in hellfire.
So here this guy's judging.
This is in books. These are the books he wrote.
Sitting, he's the full bench.
Yeah,
going, you're in, you're out.
He wrote that one of his teammates, Jim Bouton, is going to hell because when the trade all happened, when the swap happened, Jim Bouton said, "I can see trading your wife, but the dog." That was his line on the day.
That dog is going to hell too, by the way.
So he's working. So this is what he does now. He writes all these books about who's going to hell and who's is not. So Kekich's life just goes totally badly. He says, "I can't tell you how perfect it would have been if it had worked," is all Mark will now say on that. The kids were age, like they were under 5 when it all happens. Kekich said the older ones were confused and it bothered them for the rest of his lives. While Peterson said, regrets? I have no regrets. Only for my kids. It's hard to think of them with no father.
And curtain. That is an epic story. I still have so many questions that we'll have to get. Can you put out a fact sheet with this? Or
it is the weirdest story, and the fact that it's not more well known
is incredible.
Is just the strangest thing ever. But I just cannot believe that anyone could even find themselves in this situation.
In 70s, the baseball, which is the American game, right?
Yeah.
I would have thought on a whole, from sport to sport, would be more conservative than most.
It's
I
just
give you
bonkers.
us the 70s, but this is still beyond the pale, I would have thought.
And on that note, that's our first story.
Welcome aboard, everyone.
They're only going to get weirder from here.
Hope that was bonkers enough for you. And it is called Sports Bazaar, and I think we've opened our account. Thank you, I think. for bringing me up to speed with one of the great modern fairy tales.
All I'm hoping is someone right now is listening to this in the car with their partner.
Who was thinking about it? I hope it's their own partner in the car.
Hey, it's interesting what they were saying on that podcast the other day.
How does it come up? This is still a mystery. The missing scenes are who thought of it first, was it unanimous, and what Steinbrenner did when he found out. They're the two scenes for me. Good on you, Titus.
Thank you for listening to Sports Bazaar with Titus O'Reilly and Mick Molloy. We're on all the socials. Follow us there. If you'd like to leave a review on iTunes, it helps us out. And if you've got an idea for a story you'd like us to do or got some feedback, send an email to us. We're even on the electronic mail. It's info@sportsbazaar.com. See you next week.
Well, let's do it. Let's go meet the girls.